Hi VC. One of my themed videos today. I thought I'd show you a bunch of LPs that are heavily indebted to the Beatles. Their influence is everywhere, and sometimes it's more pronounced on some records than on others. So I've got a dozen or so albums here which have definitely got a heavy Beatles influence, but they're all quite different to one another. So let's get started. First off, from 1968, Harry Nilsson's Aerial Ballet. Now, when the Beatles first landed in the States, I think John Lennon was asked who his favourite artists were at the time, and he gave Harry Nilsson a name check. He was a big fan of Harry Nilsson. I think it's clear that Harry Nilsson's pretty in awe of the Beatles as well. Certainly, this album, it's obvious. On his first album, Pandemonium Shadow Show, he actually does a couple of Beatles covers. Can't Do That and She's Leaving Home. So, yeah, I think there was kind of an exchange of compliments, probably blowing smoke up each other's asses a little bit. But, yeah, the Beatles' influence is pretty overt on here. It's funny that Lennon loved it so much because, to be honest, it's melodically closer to what Paul McCartney's songs were like. But it's great stuff. It's Beatlesque Baroque pop. Not all of it is Beatles influenced, I'd say, but a lot of it is, and it has that nostalgic feel that informed Sergeant Pepper, coupled with some dark lyrical themes, divorce, Harry Nilsson's abandonment by his father, and that kind of thing, all wrapped up in sweet melodies. And I imagine it's things like that attracted Lennon to Harry Nilsson. They were, firm drinking buddies later in life. Lennon had lost his mother young, which was what kind of drew him to Paul McCartney. He'd also lost his mother young. Harry Nilsson abandoned by his father. They're the kind of people he wanted to hang out with. He liked people who had a sort of a darker sort of edge to them. So the best known tracks on here aren't really Beatlesque at all. The cover of the Fred Neil track Everybody's Talking, which ended up on the Midnight Cowboy soundtrack, is on here. And possibly one of Nilsson's best known tracks, One, which to me sounds like a blueprint for what Elliott Smith would do, 3 decades later. So Beatlesque, but there's a lot more to it. A great, great album. Then here's one that been on my radar for a long time. It was on my want list, but nowhere near the top of it. That was until I watched the video on the VC about 4 or 5 months ago, which Norman Masloff put on. And at one point he was playing a track off this called Please Read Me. And it's a Bee Gees first, which confusingly is their third album, but it's the first to have been released outside of Australia and New Zealand. And yeah, when Mazzy played that track on his channel, this went straight to number 1 on my want list, and I picked it up like a week or so later. That track has a real sort of early Fab Four sound. Brilliant track. Whole album is spectacular. Some people say it's influenced by Sgt. Pepper's, which it's not, because it was recorded before Sgt. Pepper's was released. Definitely influenced by Revolver and possibly by Strawberry Fields Forever, which came out in March '67. This came out in August '67. So there's Beatles influence. The Bee Gees have put their hands up and said how much they loved the Beatles at the time. You've got tracks like In My Own Time, which steals the bass line from Taxman and the guitar riff from Dr. Robert. Every Christian Lion-Hearted Man, which apart from being a big mouthful of a track, is full of mellotron and has a dreamy, lysergic sort of haze to it, not dissimilar to what you find on Tomorrow Never Knows. But it's a baroque pop, chamber pop, psych pop, whatever you want to call it, album. Beatles influence, but there's a lot more to it. And Tracks like To Love Somebody, obviously very well known and not overtly Beatlesque, but an absolute classic. This is a mono original, UK original, on the Polydor label, and it sounds amazing. Sounds absolutely superb. And of course the other Beatles influence was the sleeve, which was created by Klaus Voormann, who had designed the Beatles' Revolver album sleeve. Next up from Canada, an album from 1968, and it's Miss Butters by The Family Tree. And this is an early concept album about Miss Butters. It's sort of following the life of a spinster. Can't say I've followed the story terribly closely. I'm not sure it'd bear up to close scrutiny, but it's a really good album. Plays best as an album rather than as individual tracks. It was the brainchild of a guy called Bob Segarini, who has cropped up throughout the decades. He was in a band called Roxy, who were sort of, again, a psych pop band. Later he was in the Whackers, who I think released 3, perhaps 4 albums of sort of baroque power pop type music. All good bands. He released some solo material as well. Got to Have Pop, I think, was one of them, which I have somewhere, which is a really good bit of power pop. And he's kind of under the radar, doesn't get the dues he deserves, because he's been plugging away for decades and his stuff is really good, and this is no exception. It's very much Sgt. Pepper Magical Mystery Tour influenced. There's a bit of The Move in here, particularly on the vocals, plus a bit of The Left Bank and early Bee Gees too. It's kind of got that nostalgic, music hall, vaudevillian psych pop sound, and a lot of strong harmony vocals, Ringo-esque drums, bit of fuzz guitar on here, some orchestrations, and you could imagine Jellyfish sitting down and listening to this before recording their albums. It's in that kind of ballpark. Funnily enough, this was recorded and released at the same time as Nilsson's Aerial Ballet. It's on the same label, RCA Victor, has the same producer and a number of the same session musicians, so it's in the same ballpark most definitely, and is very much Beatles influenced. Then you can't talk about Beatlesque pop without mentioning this guy, and a lot of these albums could have gone in my sort of best of power pop video I did a while back, and this guy definitely belongs there. This is a genre classic. It's Emmett Rhodes' self-titled debut, and I love this album. It's often referred to as the best solo Paul McCartney album that McCartney never recorded, and it is truly a solo album. He plays all of the instruments, he engineers it, he produces it, and what a talent, what a talent. Love that album artwork as well. Emmett in sort of looking through the sort of fly screen of a burnt out window in a burnt out house, and inside the gatefold he's at the piano in his studio. He's got a very distinctive voice. There's some similarities to Paul McCartney, but he's got a higher register and a sort of more of a frailty to his voice. Melodically the songs are superb. The lyrics can sometimes be a little bit lightweight, a bit trite. The production has some rough edges, but that kind of just enhances that one-man band, homemade feel. It is an excellent album. I mean, it starts off with a track with My Face on the Floor, which is built around a sort of relentless piano riff. Fantastic tune. Elsewhere, we've got Long Time No See, which is a dark and brooding track with George Harrison-like guitar lines weaving in and out of the vocal melody. And probably the best known track on here, Fresh as a Daisy, which has a big catchy chorus, great harmonies, a single piano note sort of stabbing its way through the verses. And there's even a track on here, You Take the Dark Out of the Night, which, sung by Christine McVie, I could see that slotting in perfectly on Fleetwood Mac's Rumours album. Really good song. Overall, this is one for fans of Ben Folds, Elliott Smith, and of course solo McCartney. Superb album. Then here's one from 1972, and when I picked this up, I've been looking for it for a long time. I was drawn to it more by its reputation as a Beatlesque album than actually having heard it, which I hadn't. And I've never fully warmed to it. I'm going to show it because it is most definitely a Beatles influenced album, but it's always felt somehow lacking to me. And that's Sleepy Hollow's self-titled album from 1972. Now the best thing on here is the opener, which is called Sincerely Yours, which is pure solo John Lennon, sort of Plastic Ono band era. You know, it's got piano, guitar, bass and drums on here, and it is the heaviest track and the best track on here. Elsewhere, Take Me Back is a sort of Paul-like bit of piano balladry with George Harrison-esque guitar licks and a Badfinger feel to the harmony vocals. But the final track, Hades, kind of sums up the album because it's a big orchestrated John Lennon-esque ballad that promises a lot more than it delivers. It's just typical of the LP, really. It's good, and I played it a bit recently to try and sort of get more of a handle on it, but it's just not quite connecting with me. It later cropped up on the tax scam label Tiger Lily under the band name Bill A, and Sleepy Hollow had no idea it had been released. Whether that's easier to find than this, I don't know, because this is getting tricky to find, I think. And next up, from 1971, we have a self-titled album by White Duck. And this is very much in that sort of latter-day post-psychedelia Beatles sound. Lots of McCartney-esque bass lines, Ringo Starr type drums, McCartney vocals, and Lennon-McCartney harmonies. They're not slavish Fab Four copyists. There's sort of Americana on here, slight folk pop elements, and some aggressive slide guitar. But overall, yeah, they do sound like they're pretty heavily Beatles influenced. The best tracks on here, I suppose, are Lonely, which is a sort of McCartney-inspired piano ballad with Ringo aping drums. It's a really beautiful track. And Don't Mix With Politics, which is very much in that sort of raunchy Beatles vein. Think, Why Don't We Do It in the Road? It's sort of verging on hard rock. Yeah. Elsewhere, there's sort of nods to the band and that kind of Americana feel, but it's most definitely a Beatlesque album. Weird artwork. Comes on the blue MCA label. And this, in fact, is an Australian pressing. So, not sure how easy this is to pick up, but worth checking out if you can find it. Then, Beatles still sort of had a big influence on people going, well, right until the modern day, let's face it, but in the mid-70s, late 70s, there's still bands coming along who wanted that Beatles sound. One of those was Liverpool Express, who, as their name suggests, were from Liverpool, very much enthralled to the Beatles. So this came out in 1976. It's a mid-70s pop rock take on the Beatles sound with more McCartneyisms than Lennonisms on here. All those elements of both, with a bit of George Harrison referencing guitar licks here and there. I suppose the album's typified by the track Never the Same Without Love, which is pure Paul piano balladry with sort of brass band chug and Harrison guitar lines. It's a good album. Definitely got that sort of soft pop rock 70s feel to it. There's a fair bit of orchestration, but it's less nuanced than what George Martin provided for the Beatles. It's more like a clock-watching BBC concert orchestra, to be honest. Similar in places to UK band Pilot. So if you're into that, you could do a lot worse than check this out. Decent album. You can get it cheap. Then here's a really good one. This came out in 1978. It's a band called Key, and their album Fit Me In. And they were a duo. One of them was German, the other British. And this only came out for some reason in Germany and Spain, which is a bit of a crime because it's such a good album. It's very much McCartney-esque pop in an Abbey Road White Album vein. There's a touch of solo Emmett Rhodes in here, and the sound at times is not a million miles away from sort of power pop of Teenage Fan Club, particularly on the track Pamela. It's beautifully arranged, great production, warm and lush. It's all twisty Macca style bass lines, piano and mainly acoustic guitars, and it's a beautifully realised album. It really is. The highlight, probably the first track, although it's hard to pick highlights because the whole thing is superb. The first track is The Farmer and the Fisherman. Spectacular opener. It's catchy as hell. Massive harmony vocals, and it'll stick in your head for days. So if you can find it, check it out. Key, Fit Me In. Not quite sure what's going on the back sleeve there, these sort of greyed out panels. Whether there were other members of the band who got kind of written out the picture, I don't know, but yeah, hunt that one down. Then again, you can't mention Beatles influenced music without mentioning these guys, Badfinger, and their debut album from 1970, Magic Christian Music. This was on the Apple label. They're obviously Beatles sort of proteges, their sort of pet project. And they did better albums. Probably did albums which were more obviously Beatles influenced, because this one is sort of a little bit all over the place. It's supposed to be a soundtrack, but there are only 3 songs from the film of this name, which are Come and Get It, Carry On Till Tomorrow and Rock of All Ages. And Come and Get It is a track that's written by McCartney. It is pure McCartney, and it sets the blueprint for the Badfinger sound, and is an absolute classic, probably one of their better known songs. Then Carry On Till Tomorrow is almost a folky progressive number with George Martin providing a string arrangement. And Rock of All Ages is reminiscent of back in the USSR, so it's pretty much a hard rock tune. This has the Beatles guitar sound all over it, lots of unhurried Ringo style drum rolls and big splashy cymbals. Yeah, what's not to like, really? It's not all overtly Beatlesque though. Midnight Sun is like the poppier side of Slade, who themselves were pretty heavily influenced by the Beatles, and that kind of is crossed with a sort of Roy Wood sound. And the track Fisherman reminds me so much of DB&T's Fresh Air album. DB&T were basically Dave D, Dozy, Mick and Titch without Dave D. So when he disappeared to do a solo career or something, the DB&T part of the band put out an album called Fresh Air. It doesn't get a lot of love, but I think it's a sensational album. It's got all those kind of late 60s British invasion influences, Beatles, The Move, The Kinks, and spectacular. And the track Fisherman really reminds me of that. The album ends on a high note. The track Maybe Tomorrow is sort of an orchestrated Everly Brothers style ballad. It's very, very Beatlesy. So there's a lot going on here. It's not all obviously Beatlesque, and they've probably made their sound a bit more consistent as their albums went on, but this is a really good starting point for them. Then to South Africa, and an album that came out in 1970, and it's the Flames self-titled album. And this was actually their 5th album, but you wouldn't really know it, I suppose, because their other albums don't really crop up too much. Not this one's easy to get. They were discovered in London they were gigging around London, and the Beach Boys were in London, I think, recording at the time, and happened to see them in the club and signed them to their brother records label. And I think the Flame were the only band apart from the Beach Boys to record for that label. It's very much in the latter day Beatles, Badfinger sound sort of ballpark, with a lot of hard rock elements. It's a very consistent album. The sound is really consistent. The opener, See the Light, is fantastic. An absolute classic tune. Real hard rocking Beatles sound. And it was a minor US hit, I believe. Other sort of highlights, Don't Worry Bill, which sort of sounds like Emmett Rhodes, Jeff Lynne, Travelling Wilburys sort of hybrid, with again some hard-edged guitar on there, which is along the lines of I've Got a Feeling from the Let It Be album. Highs and lows mixes solo John Lennon and solo George Harrison on something that sounds like it's escaped from the Abbey Road LP. So it's all good stuff, all great stuff. And drummer here, Ricky Fattar, turned up as Stig in the Rattles after this. And Blondie Chaplin, wherever he is. Why can't I see him? There we are. Blondie Chaplin and Ricky Fattar would go on to record with the Beach Boys for a run of their albums, which included Holland. So, you know, these guys knew what they were doing. And this is a great album. Well worth picking up. Then I mentioned it, talking about Flame. Can't get away from the Rattles if you're going to talk about Beatles-influenced albums. The Rattles self-titled from 1978. This was the sort of Neil Innes, Monty Python musical parody, which sort of sent up the Beatles. But it's fully endorsed by the Beatles. George Harrison loved it and is always more than capable of laughing at himself. This perfectly captures the Beatles sound throughout their many sort of eras, if you like. You can hear the tracks that they're parodying on all of these tunes. Number One and Hold My Hand perfectly capture the early Beatles sound, sort of complete with all the yeahs you could ever want. Ouch is Help. Piggy in the middle is I Am the Walrus. Good Times Roll is Lucy in the Sky of Diamonds. Cheese and Onion sort of mashes up A Day in the Life with Imagine. And there's even a token Ringo vocal, or you know, the Rattles drummer's vocal in Living in Hope, which is like a countrified vocal, a bit like Act Naturally, which Ringo sang on the UK version of Help. And then you've got Nevertheless, which is sort of a sitar fueled track, very much parodying Within You Without You. So a great album. It's not just a comedy album, you know, it's musically it's fantastic, it's beautifully observed, and if you forget the fact that it's a send up, it's an essential album, really is. And the packaging's great, you know, gatefold sleeve, the full colour booklet stapled in there, well worth getting. And while we're on the subject of parodies, Todd Rundgren's Utopia and Deface the Music. And this came out in 1980. And there's some speculation about whether this is mocking the Beatles. I mean, the track Deface the Music, is that self-deprecating on Todd Rundgren's part? You know, like he's not worthy, he can't do it justice. But he does. I mean, he's Todd Rundgren, he's a multi-talented guy himself. This sounds like a new wave era fan tribute. There's no attempt at fake Scouse accents. The production doesn't sound like a period production. The instrumentation makes no concessions. You know, they use synths where the Beatles would have used brass or strings. So it's very much a 1980s product, and it is great. I mean, it's a big game of spot the reference. There's a lot of clever sort of collage going on here. You have to kind of work out which Beatles songs being sent up, parodied, referenced at the time. He only pays tribute to the early to mid-period Beatles, so there's no White Album or Abbey Road sort of stuff on here. But then Todd Rundgren was in the Nas, whose first album pretty much covered that era. So on here, I Just Want to Touch You is I Want to Hold Your Hand. Hoi Polloi is Penny Lane, but with synths where there would have been brass. Life Goes On is his take on Eleanor Rigby with synth strings. And Everybody Else Is Wrong is I Am the Walrus. And that track, I could imagine fitting right in to the Duke of Stratosphere's album. It's just, that really captures the sound beautifully. So this is a really good album. I don't think Todd Rundgren is mocking the Beatles. I think he's obviously a lifelong fan and paying tribute and doing a really good job of it. It's a really, really good listen. So there you go. That's the last of the albums I'm going to show today. I'll be back soon with another video. Till then, take care. See you soon.